Without further ado, I'm very happy to introduce our graduation speaker, Tao Respondent.
To paraphrase Marx, Groucho, not Carl, don't worry. Before I begin speaking, I have a couple of important things to say. First, thank you, Alva. It's such a great and unexpected honor to have been invited to speak here today, especially since I didn't make it to my own ceremony 26 years ago. It feels particularly powerful to be here during such a historic moment in our country and our society at large. Second, most importantly, congratulations to each of you, the graduating members of the class of 2024, and to your proud parents and family members. What a joy it is to celebrate this all together with you. I was once at a celebratory lunch in a castle in Italy, seated next to a wonderful older woman who also happened to be the matriarch of a huge multinational Italian fashion brand. Wanting to make conversation, I started to tell her a story I'd heard about Bertrand Russell. Late in life, Russell sat down for an interview to review the long and varied trajectory of his career. When I was in my 20s and 30s, he explained, I was very sharp. My brain worked exceptionally well. So, naturally, I worked on mathematics. Russell wrote the Principia Mathematica with Alfred North Whitehead, seeking the foundations of mathematics and logic, taking 300 pages just to define the number one. By the time I was in my late 30s, he continued, my brain had deteriorated a little bit, and I really couldn't do mathematics anymore. So I got into philosophy. For the next 40 years, as we know, Russell did some of the most important philosophical work of the 20th century. By age 80, he went on, my brain deteriorated a little bit more. I became a bit senile, a bit too stupid for philosophy, so I got into politics. The elderly matriarch interrupted me without missing a beat and said in her thick Italian accent, let me guess, after that, fashion? I went through each of these 4 stages in quick succession after receiving the invitation to speak here today. First, I counted the days. Second, I pondered for a long time what profound philosophical wisdom I might impart on you. Third, as the protests began, I watched nervously, both proud of my alma mater for staying true to its radical roots, but also admittedly worried that this whole event might get canceled. Finally, I listened to my Los Angeles friends voice their deepest concern. What will you wear? They asked. Joking aside, while most of us may never have been quite as clever as Bertrand Russell, we can at least say that we began our life journey close to the top, in that second tier of great mental deterioration that awaits us all, doing philosophy. My dear friend Mark Rathall, who was getting his PhD here when I was an undergraduate, and who's now a professor at Oxford, told me he was once called into an interdisciplinary faculty meeting early in his career. Education, like everything else in this world, has been going through a steady process of corporatization. The administrators had called all the professors in and inquired as to how they planned to, quote, add value to their students, now regrettably referred to as clients, or even worse, as customers. Mark kept quiet for most of the meeting, but finally, he pointed out that if the philosophers were doing their jobs as teachers, they should be taking away value, certainly not adding to it. Because if you've learned anything in the last 4 years, I hope it has been to question the unspoken assumptions and foundations of what it is to live a life as your parents and society expect you to live it. I'm Italian. I have a family tree that I can trace back 1,000 years. This sounds exciting to some, but it brings existential burdens. How do you differentiate yourself? How do you not just become a continuation of a line? How do you create a difference that makes a difference? These questions were very much on my mind when I came here in the 1990s. Being a good student and the first in my immediate family to go to college, I had chosen a sensible major in architecture that combined practicality with creative pursuit. But my passion had always been for philosophy. I devoured all of Bertrand Russell's books in high school, and I was delighted when I saw an elective course in the catalog called Existentialism in Literature and Film. The first day I walked into that class, I found the legendary Hubert Dreyfus, an adorable little man with bright orange hair and a matching mustache, engaged in this exhilarating task of both teaching and learning with us, his students. That class changed my life forever. Bert Dreyfus understood that philosophy isn't necessarily something that can or should be made explicit. Rather, it presents itself in everything from our bodily skills to our cultural practices. One might discover profound philosophical insights in a novel, a film, or even in a way of life, as much as, or more so, than in a book of philosophy. It began to dawn on me that I could become a philosopher without becoming an academic. This was a huge revelation, and I felt safe changing my major from architecture to philosophy. Now, those of us who are predisposed and attracted to philosophical thinking are the very same ones who are most often unsettled by the biggest, most difficult to answer questions about the meaning of life, the universe, and everything. We are the ones who are constantly made anxious by the question, put technically, and I hope the parents will forgive me for using a little bit of complex philosophical jargon. What the fuck is going on here? And why? When I was in my early 20s, this question plagued me. I suffered from severe panic attacks. I would suddenly feel dizzy, nauseous, and afraid of everything, basically. Now, philosophers love making distinctions, and I should make one here between clinical and existential anxiety, between panic and not panic. But I found a strange comfort and consolation when Bert Dreyfus explained that a fundamental mode of human being is anxiety. An anxiety that emerges not from your individual neuroses or inability to cope, but rather from the groundlessness of existence itself, from the lack of any ultimate justification for any of our actions or decisions. This ultimate lack of rules or grounding, this absence of grand narratives, while it can be deeply unsettling, also opens up the possibility for authenticity. That is, the ability to respond both responsibly and responsively to the uniqueness of our own circumstances. A much bigger relief came a couple of years later during one of Bert's upper-level existentialism courses, when he explained that he had come to understand that anxiety is not, in fact, a universal feature of human existence. It is, rather, contingent on our specific age and era. The ancient Greeks, when faced with the same groundlessness of existence, responded not with anxiety, but with awe. In other words, awe is as appropriate a response to the world having no fixed answers or guidelines as is anxiety. This is an idea that I carry with me to this day. It even cured me of my petty flight anxiety. It seems simple enough to turn a frightened whoa into an exhilarated wow as the plane teeters into the air, riding the waves of turbulence, literally removing one's grounding in the process. Who says existential phenomenology can't be therapeutic? Armed with this knowledge and with a camera, which I thought of as one of my sharpest philosophical tools, I went looking for examples of authentic artists, artists who were in the business of truth setting itself to work. Art, according to this framing, is not an imperfect representation of the world, but rather the intangible, contingent reality of what it means to be human or a thing in a particular era. That intangible contingent reality is, in the hands of an authentic artist, turned into something concrete and real and reflected back to us. Art, as one of Bert's favorite philosophers said, gives to things their look and to men their outlook on themselves. I believe that all a philosopher can do, because it's also all the brain does, is make distinctions. And throughout my life, I found ways to use art to explain and explore the distinctions that shape our reality. I found a potent example of art as life among the Roma people in southern Spain, who live and breathe the art of flamenco. I studied amongst them, drinking from this fountain of inspiration, breaking bread with 80-year-old toothless poets and philosophers, and over the course of the next year, I made my first film, Flamenco, A Personal Journey. When my marriage dissolved some years later, I found myself wrestling with two fundamental questions. Why does monogamy exist as an ideal? And why does marriage exist as an institution? This led me to make my film Monogamish, which delves into the philosophy, the psychology, and the politics of contemporary relationships, making distinctions, questioning assumptions, and using art to reflect on the human condition. These have been consistent themes in my work and my life. Bert was also deeply interested in what it means to be a human in our uniquely technological age. He used philosophy to critique the presumptions of the artificial intelligence project, a conversation perhaps more relevant today than it was even when Bert was alive. You might assume from all this that Bert was a Luddite, but he wasn't. In fact, he was one of the first to embrace podcasting as a means to disseminate his lectures from the halls of academia and into the quote-unquote real world. He warned us to be aware. He didn't want technology to turn us into passive consumers of the world. He encouraged us to use technology against itself, against its promise of obviating the need for skillful, risky engagement with the world. After graduating, and with all of Bert's teachings in mind, I bought an old school bus on eBay, removed the seats, built 3 editing stations, and traveled around the country in it. Just a brief history lesson, since many of you students here were probably born after the year 2000. Way back then, digital media began to replace film as the industry standard. This radical shift democratized the act of filmmaking, which had previously been inaccessible due to the high cost of materials. Empowered by this technological development, we formed a filmmaking collective and employed these digital tools to make films with and about artists from every discipline, painters to poets, designers, and musicians. 10 years later, I returned to Berkeley to make a documentary about Bert and his ideas. His PhD students, many of whom had been graduate student TAs while I was here, appeared in my film called Being in the World, which celebrates the artistry, the difficulty, the madness, and the paradoxes of being human in a technological age. Since then, my life has taken an unexpected turn away from filmmaking and into a collaborative, interdisciplinary project that brings philosophy and art to the shores of a toxic, lithium-filled California lake called the Salton Sea. Along its eastern shore sits a strange post-apocalyptic community called Bombay Beach, a derelict, quiet, and sparsely inhabited town of a few hundred people. To summarize what is likely the topic of an entire dissertation in only a few short sentences, Bombay Beach for me is the ultimate intersection of theory and praxis. That mystical, sought-after marriage that we philosophers, if we're doing something right, spend our whole lives seeking. Bombay Beach is a place where the American dream has gone awry. It stands as an accidental museum to certain values, like hubris and the arrogant notion that we can and should dominate nature in exploitation, and what happens when these values are taken to their logical conclusion. I'll give you a hint. It involves inevitable collapse. As you leave the walls of academia and enter the quote-unquote real world, the truly intrepid, inquisitive ones will realize that places plagued with societal collapse are often the best breeding grounds for new philosophical undertakings. It was there in Bombay Beach where I discovered that just as the academic paper may not always be the best expression of the philosopher, the building may not always be the best expression of the architect. Since 2015, Mark Rathall and I have curated a yearly philosophy conference there, challenging academic philosophers to make their ideas intelligible to other philosophers who were schooled not in the hallowed halls of the ivory tower, but rather, if you'll forgive the cliche, in the University of Life. Together, we ask questions like, can philosophy persist in such a place? Might it be more necessary here than anywhere else? This practice is a kind of living philosophy that privileges art, authenticity, and even a sense of awe over and above more mundane concerns. Those of us part of this movement in Bombay Beach are deeply privileged to engage in an act of world building, the act of rethinking what it means to be human today in our unique age, faced with our unique and ever so urgent set of challenges. Now, I've talked a little bit about philosophers and teachers, from Bertrand Russell to Hubert Dreyfus, who helped shape my worldview and change the trajectory of my life. You undoubtedly have your own. These thinkers and their ideas, contrary to what anyone might try to tell you, they matter. When you leave here, society will try to make you repackage these ideas into a tidy little box of things I studied in college. Society will commodify the parts of your mind that leave here today more educated than others, hoping you take your training, your critical thinking, your artistic eye, your capacity to make distinctions, and apply it to their version of the world. And then, society will ask that in a few years, you forget most of the more dangerous ideas that you learned here. Because often to age means to lose one's radicalism, to lose one's activism, to make fewer distinctions of your own. Marry the normal way, make money the normal way, architect the normal way, do philosophy in the normal way. But these ideas, they were dangerous when they were written, and they're more dangerous today, if you actually take them seriously. Remember that the only reason you know these philosophers' names is because they didn't do the quick and normal thing. The ideas of the great thinkers, from Anaximander to Marx, this time Carl, from Diogenes to Angela Davis, from St. Augustine to Simone de Beauvoir, they are deeply dangerous. I don't have to remind you that doing philosophy is, in essence, a constant and relentless questioning. Questioning, in the words of one famous existentialist philosopher, is the piety of thought. In these recent months, the courage of students challenging the narratives of the powerful has been evident here and in universities across the country. We've witnessed both academic and governmental authorities resort to suspensions, arrests, and violent police suppression in an effort to silence the students' rightful outrage and indignation against militarism, imperialism, and colonialism. We've witnessed how swiftly authorities and bureaucrats turn to suppression and violence when their entrenched narratives are challenged. We've seen entrenched powers and institutions attempt to discredit and suppress this movement. So far, they've failed, and they'll continue to fail because of people like you who must take pride in their lack of value to the status quo. It is urgently necessary to remember, no matter where you sit on the political spectrum, that protests like these are rooted in deep engagement with profound, provocative, and necessary philosophical ideas and ideals. Behind every issue are disagreements of difference. That's it. Tribes, people, religions, us, them. We sometimes carve distinctions with the crudest of scalpels. Now, I'm sure many of you will go on to excel in traditional careers, as lawyers, as politicians, as entrepreneurs, and hopefully as teachers. Regardless of the path you choose to follow, please remember to stay philosophers. Question everything, especially authority. Question your practices. Question the philosophers who you most admire. It is through this engaged questioning that you most honor them, their work, and this strange and vital discipline that is philosophy. Lastly, don't forget the groundlessness of existence. Take advantage of it to carve out your own authentic existence within the worlds and domains that you decide to participate in. Marinate in those rich cultural histories, learn from the greats, but also challenge yourself to constantly reinterpret the habits of those around you, always in your unique way, responding to your specific circumstances. Don't be afraid to make that move from philosophy to politics. And, forgive the pun, fashion your own way of marrying theory to praxis. Then, one day, maybe, when you're almost 50, you'll be wondering if you made the right decisions in life, if there's any ground on which you might justify these idiosyncratic choices that you've made. And then you might try and remind yourself that no, there isn't. And this groundlessness is a feature, not a bug, of human being with a capital B. And then you might get an email from the chair of the philosophy department at UC Berkeley asking you to come and make a speech to the graduating class. Looking at that invitation, sitting mundanely in your email inbox, you might not feel so anxious or alone. You might even feel the purest and most authentic sense of awe. Go and be philosophers. The world needs you. Your ability to think critically and your ability to reevaluate all values now more than ever. Thank you and congratulations to you all.
Thank you, Tao.